Hi, and welcome to Made's March webinar. We kicked off this year doing one webinar a month based off of topics that our customers and our community of emerging brands are interested in. Last month, we talked about Trump tariffs and its implications. And today, we're going to talk about production planning. We have friends that are just back from Expo West, and we're hearing from them, boots on the ground, if you will, at Expo West, that production planning, forecasting, reducing COGS, all of these operational tasks are what is top of mind for brands today. So we decided to do a production planning 101, which is what this really is. Now, we have some other little goodies that we'll send afterwards, of course. And if you have questions, comments, concerns, raise your hand, pop a chat in, and we'll just rock and roll from there. Now, Rob Marlinski is my business partner for Made. I'm Elle Black, and we're happy to have you guys here. We really designed these webinars to be less kind of like businessy and almost like a podcast where we're just kind of chatting with each other and talking about what we're hearing from our customers, from other emerging brands in the market. So on that note, Rob, do you want to introduce yourself before we jump in?
Yeah, so for the people that joined us today, thanks for joining us. Good to see more people popping in here. For those of you that haven't spoken with me or you're not an existing client of ours, my name's Rob Marlinski. I'm the COO and co-founder of Made. I spent the last decade in the e-commerce and product manufacturing space. I've started my own e-commerce brands. I've spent a two-time e-commerce store founder, scaling those brands to 7 and 8 figures. So just like many of our clients, I've gone through the challenge of getting through those hurdles, whether it's how do you scale from 7 to 8, or how do you get to a high 8 figure brand? What are the challenges you face throughout that? So really able to connect with our brands on that. At production planning, I've developed thousands of products for hundreds of brands. We produce millions of units a year for brands. So really excited to talk about this topic with the brands, give them my insight, answer a lot of the questions that we've been getting the last week or two from our brands and the other people that are on this call, and jump into it.
Amazing. That sounds great. Rob, first things first, are brands struggling with inventory? And if so, why?
Yes, I think every brand struggles with inventory, whether they want to admit it or not. I believe the biggest issue is they're not doing inventory forecasting correctly. A lot of brands will have their inventory forecasting down for what their demand is going to be, but it needs to go deeper in that. And that's really where brands struggle. And I think it's just because brands, they're not so focused on their back end operations, but that's where your inventory forecasting needs to get deeper. And that's what we call production planning. So production planning is when you start getting into the nitty-gritty of working with your factory, working with your supplier, working with your logistics company, and actually planning out that not only that forecasted sales demand you're going to have, but when are we going to need that inventory? Now let's break it down into the nitty-gritty with all these other moving parts that need to be a part to actually get this inventory on time, so we're not running out of stock, or we're not buying too much inventory, which means we're just stocking it in our warehouse and paying extra money for storage fees sitting on inventory that we really don't need yet. So my short answer, yes, I think brands are struggling with inventory forecasting for many different reasons.
Okay, so let's talk about the difference. What's the difference between inventory forecasting and production planning?
Yeah, I'll give the quick overview on inventory forecasting. I know we're going to dive a little deeper into it because I know you have some stuff that you want to show everybody, but um, inventory forecasting, as most people know, it is just predicting the demand that you need based on your previous sales history. So, if you have 12 months of sales data, that's a great start. If you have even more than that, you're even in a better position because you really can see what your seasons are like. When are you having big sales events? How are your holidays are doing? And you can do good inventory forecasting based on the sales demand and data that you have. And when it comes to the difference now, when you get into the production planning, that's when you really need to sit down with your factories and you need to start looking at them as a partner. And they want to look at you as a partner as well, too. Because now what you're going to do is you're going to take that inventory forecasting that you have based on that sales data, and you're going to lay it out with the factory and say, like, let's not just focus on one order, knowing that, hey, we have this order where we need to do 10,000 pieces. Let's focus on the next 12 months or maybe the next 18 months, and let's really start breaking it out like that. Like, okay, we know over the next 12 months, we're going to sell 100,000 units of this. So let's now put on the schedule. When do we need to run these productions? So we're running the optimal quantity that we need based on the forecast that we have. So we're not putting too much cash flow out. Let's make sure that everybody that's involved to make this product, whether that's the material supplier, the packaging supplier, the actual factory and production line, the logistics company, everybody's on the same page and has it in their schedule as well. That's really where you start getting into production planning and setting yourself up to be better positioned on the inventory forecasting side.
Yeah, so it sounds like what you're saying is production planning is about sharing more insight and data with your factory partner rather than just one RFQ, request for quote, or one PO. So how is that done today? How do you do this?
If a brand is only planning with their factory for one purchase order at a time, I can tell you right now, they're leaving money on the table. They're losing money just by planning one order at a time.
Yeah.
So you need to really be looking at that bigger picture to create these production plans where you're going to have your schedule out where maybe you're running a continuous production where you know, okay, we're going to always have a production and process. And that's not necessarily what people don't understand is you could run 80% of a production and then finish the last 20% just to shorten down your lead time. So maybe you do run a production for 3 months of inventory, but you only want to be taking it on monthly deliveries. There's ways to structure and build that when you have these schedules out. And all that's going to do for a brand is you're going to shorten your lead time and you're going to have less money out of pocket,
Yeah.
which that money is going to allow you to purchase more inventory, put more money into ads, and scale your sales.
Yeah, I love that. So it's so funny, Rob and I, Rob, you and me, we've been around and doing this for decades between the two of us. So we remember the time before COVID. And in the time before COVID, this was more common and it was called just-in-time manufacturing. Now I feel like COVID broke all of the supply chains. And so we really moved away from this concept of just-in-time manufacturing. How do you see production planning as being part and parcel or a little bit different than that?
We definitely got away from just-in-time manufacturing during COVID. And, I think a lot of that brands are still in that mindset of they can't do just-in-time planning.
Yeah.
I personally look at just-in-time planning and production planning almost really similar
Yeah.
because yes, you are ordering those products just in time to get them, but you're not doing it last minute like you were pre-COVID. You're like, oh man, we just realized we only have 500 units left in stock. Let's order and get these back. You're getting deeper and you have it on your schedule. You have it, the factory has in their schedule. The material suppliers have it on their schedule. Your freight carriers have it on their schedule. So it's further in advance where, yes, we're ordering it, just in time and timing it. We're not doing these big inventory quantities like that. So it is similar. I think you're just more detailed. And I think that's where brands really struggle are
Yeah.
how to even begin with production planning. Like, how do
Yeah.
I even take, well, here's my forecasted sales that I think I'm going to
Yeah.
have for the year based on historical data. Now, what do I do with it? Do I go to my supplier and just say, hey, here you go. I'm going to sell 100,000 units this year. Like, let's make sure that we start a production on time. I'm going to let you guys do this, or does the brand have to like lay it out for the factory and lay it out for the material suppliers and logistics suppliers of this is when we need to start these things. I think that's really why brands don't do production planning. They don't know where to start with it.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point, Rob. And what we're talking about, and we've got a question, so I'm going to tie these two things together. But what we're really talking about is how do you be more transparent and ask for more transparency with your vendor? And we've got a question from Sam, so I'm going to pull that question in 1 second. But before, I'm going to set the stage a little bit. One of the things that we know that brands struggle with is actually creating this more trusted relationship with your vendor. Our point of view on this, and we have a little template that we'll send out afterwards with like an Excel spreadsheet that can show you how to do production planning that you can share with your vendor. But we're going to also talk about, how do you build that deeper relationship? Production planning is the bridge to help build the relationship with your vendor partners from just one PO, one RFQ into, a longer, deeper relationship. So that being said, here's the question. And this is a fun one because we actually just helped a client solve this exact problem. So Sam said, hey, what do you do if your vendor isn't able or won't provide you clear data on what they can produce over a set period? Some of his suppliers, it's easy because he knows they can produce, for example, 10 widgets a day, but for others, it just varies on what other work they have, and there's no insight into what capacity do these suppliers actually have to make the products for the brands.
Yeah, that's actually a great question.
Yeah.
That's one thing that we do at Made when we're vetting our factories, especially when we're matching a product with a factory. And I know this is something that brands don't do when they're working directly with the factory themselves. But a lot of brands, most brands actually, they fail to even verify with the factory before they get into their first production of how many full-time employees do you have?
Yeah.
You know, how many people are fully staffed at this factory? Because what a lot of brands don't realize is most factories, if they're not running at full production schedules, they're just running with temp workers.
Yeah.
So to answer that question, the reason the factory may not be able to tell you, like, this is how many units we can make a day or how many units we can push out in X period of time is because they don't have the guaranteed workforce that they know that we're going to be able to consistently run at this capacity every day. Um, but to transition out of that, kind of how we just help somebody is when you have that production plan in place, knowing that, hey, we're going to be running X amount of productions a year. This is going to be our schedule.
Yeah.
Now the factory is looking at you as a partner. You're looking at the factory as a partner because they're saying, okay, well, we know that we're going to be on schedule to be running this many productions specifically for your product. That means that we're going to need X amount of workers for these different lines that we're going to be doing that we can now staff and plan keeping around so they don't need to be temp workers. So now these workers are going to be on time, full time with the factory. They're going to be working on your product, which is huge because that's going to result in better efficiency and better quality control. Because when you start working with temp workers on productions, that means you're getting new workers every single time, which means they need to learn the product, they need to learn the processes, and that's when you start to see slower production times and higher defect rates.
Yeah.
So if you're able to really put that plan out in place with the factory so they can see, what your volume is going to be for the year, they can offer more commitment to you by dedicating these workers, ensuring that they have the right level employees to keep up with the demand for that product they're going to be making for you.
Yeah, and Sam, I'm going to answer your question even more specifically. So, what makes Made unique is our model. We use what's called a boots on the ground model, where we have boots on the ground at all of the factories that's a third party managing the production runs. I think it's actually very, very difficult to get liquidity data from suppliers on how much capacity they have available. That's not something that they want widely known. So, it's not like you can, go to a website and actually see how much liquidity each individual factory has, and then you can figure out how to actually tap into that. So the way that we work around that is this very human boots on the ground model. That also helps brands because they can then have that they can trust that there's a third party advocating for them at the factory. This is how we're able to guarantee our 1% or less defect rate because we have a boots on the ground person making sure that that happens. Now, we actually just had this exact same thing happen for one of our customers. We've been making vegan leather bags for a growing brand, and her defect rate when she came to us was at 5%. We got it down to less than 1%. We got better line of sight on her inventory, so she knew when she was going to receive it, by which date exactly, and we broke up her production runs into multiple over the year. At the end of year one, which we're going on year two now with this brand, at the end of year one, we had with our boots on the ground partner, we had a sit down with them to do our production planning for the next year. We came to that meeting with a production plan. So we had a whole year forecast done. We said, this is what we think this customer is going to need the entire by SKU for the entire year. And the factory went back and said, okay, great. Now we can plan our hiring. We can plan and staff, how much of the downstream raw materials we need to buy. We can figure out exactly what we need to do for an entire year. That's the confidence that the factory needs to create great products for brands. So what ended up happening is after we had that meeting, the factory came back to us and they said, listen, we went back and did our own internal review, and we realized that because this bag has these very special, unique parts to it, making it is difficult. And so we can't use temp workers like Rob was talking about. So instead, because we now know the entire factory plan, we want to scale up and have at least 2 to 3 people for the whole year that are experts in making this product and can make sure that we meet that. And that's what they're doing. So, the long story short of it is it takes time to build a relationship. And the main thing is to really transition the relationship with your suppliers from like transactional ones, one-off POs, one-off RFQs, into more relationship ones. And that's just hard to do. There's many different ways you can do it. You can do it yourself, which is what we're going to, talk about and help you do. Or, like I said, we use this boots on the ground model where all of our customers have direct access to their factory through their third-party liaison. We think that model works best for many, many reasons, but that's how we do it. And unfortunately, There isn't, like I said, there's not like a website you can go to look by factory how much, available time they have or uptime or downtime they have on their lines, because it just doesn't work that way. So anyway, that's
Yeah,
that about that.
I think to touch on that, just because we get brands that we see that a lot and we ask them a lot, is how valuable having the boots on the ground is
Yeah.
versus having that trusted relationship with your supplier, but working with them from the other side of the world. Obviously, your supplier and factory, they are your partner, but at the end of the day, they may not be as strict as you are going to be when it comes to a product. Their defects may be a little bit different than what you think a defect is. Like a product may have a little mark that a factory says, okay, you know what, like it's minor. Everybody has heard from their factory at one point in time throughout their journey and their e-commerce journey when they've had an issue and they've shown it to the factory says, oh yes, that's small, that's okay, or we'll replace that for you in the future. But they don't actually have a plan in place to capitalize on like making sure that that is getting replaced. But when you have that third party there, it holds the factory more accountable for those issues when there are those defects. We're able to say, hey, that's not approved, that has to get remade.
Mhm.
Or if there is a major defect that's going on throughout the production line, a lot of times brands aren't going to catch that until the end of the production or until the product's delivered to them.
Yeah.
Versus when you have somebody that's advocating for you, boots on the ground at the factory, they could catch that really early on, fix it in the production process, so you're not then facing that issue that's going to cause, further delays, higher return rates from your customers. So it really just adds that accountability to the factory.
Rob, that sounds expensive. How how does it work?
Um, it's a great question. It's not expensive. Uh, Believe it or not, it's actually no expense to the brands, to operate like that when they're working with somebody like Made. What makes us really special is the fact that we have our own network of factories that we built over the last decade. And there's a lot of criteria to become a vetted factory and a partner factory of ours to get into there. You got to have the track record. We've worked with the factories personally, so we have these relationships with them. But what makes it unique is that these factories are under contract with Made, and we're essentially an extension of their team as well, just as we are of the brand. So, Made, we're compensated off of our factories. It's based on, our production volumes that we're able to bring through these factories on an annual basis for them.
Yeah,
Um,
I think the model works really well, right? Like we've aligned it really well. The factories pay us a commission when we bring them new customers. And the difference really in what we're doing versus, an Alibaba or even a do-it-yourself model is we're trying to build these long-term relationships. So the factories see the long-term value, right? We're not a one and done shop. We're trying to actually build long-term relationships that help lower COGS for brands while also increasing the quality. And the boots on the ground model facilitates that.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Rob, should we talk about how, if you want to do your own production planning, how you do it exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing is we should start with the first step that a brand needs to do, and that's their inventory forecasting. And there's oodles of tools out there.
Yes.
Some of these tools are really expensive to use, but brands can just do inventory forecasting themselves with a simple Excel sheet and a simple formula. Elle, this is one of her favorite things to do is let me just do forecasting for all of our brands. Who wants help? Let me do this for you because I know you got enough going on. So I
Actually,
think,
that's very true. I am happy to do your inventory forecasting for you. I'm an expert at this. I can do it in just like click, 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 done, done, done. We have infrastructure built. So here's how we do it. We collect historical value, historical inventory, sales data over the past year by channel. We then segment it by SKU. Then we calculate your sales volume. Typically, we do this by an average daily sale. This actually helps us look at the volume you need over a year. Then we factor in lead time. So we go back to your supplier, we look at historical POs, or we just ask you, and we factor in the lead time to get the product made. And then we add the averages at that time of the year based off of historical data for shipping. That's a piece that a lot of other software tools don't actually do. And then we determine the safety stock, the buffer stock that you need, just in case anything in the downstream supply chain goes wrong, or who knows, we live in unprecedented times, am I right? Then we set the reorder points. We automate all of this in little spreadsheets. Reorder points are based off of all of what we just calculated. How much inventory do you need? When do you need it by? What's your safety stock? What's your supplier's lead time? What are the average shipping times based off of historical data? And then we watch and we let you know. We just send you a little note. Hey, it's time to reorder. And that's just how you do the forecasting piece, right? Once we have all of that figured out, then we go into inventory forecasting. So now that we've calculated our annual inventory needs, we can determine the reorder frequency. Now, this is typically what we'll work with the brand. Rather than doing a PO, purchase order, or an RFQ with the number of units we need per SKU, we will look at all the SKUs and the annual forecast of units needed, and we'll ask the brand or we'll ask the supplier to help us figure out how often to reorder by when to ensure that a brand is never out of stock. And so that would be determining the reorder frequency. Then we would determine, this is my favorite one actually, it's called the optimal order quantity unit, the EOQ. This one's super complicated, but like Rob said, I nerd out on this stuff. So if anybody wants me to do this, I will do it for you. What this helps you understand is actually what does it cost and like what is the best order size to minimize cost. So it takes your annual demand, it takes your ordering cost per unit and your holding cost per unit, and you use those three variables to figure out the optimal order quantity. And really what this looks like, and this is what's really fun when we talk about this, is I'm going to ask you, how much does it cost you to hold this unit, right? And like, how much does it cost you to actually order this product? And we're going to look at all of your costs. We're going to look at your warehousing costs, right? We're going to look at your sell-through rates. We're going to figure out per unit, how much are you paying to just warehouse it? And then how much does it cost you in overhead, in software, and in people to actually reorder something? That's a fun one that people have like their eyes turned on because they're like, oh my gosh, I'm spending 19 hours per PO and I have 4 people that touch it before it even happens. Like all of these costs need to be baked into your actual COGS, the cost of goods sold of your unit. So we'll figure out your economic order quantity to determine the optimal order quantity. Whew, that's a mouthful, but we can do it. And we have a really simple kind of rule. Depending on how fast your brand is growing, if you're a fast growing brand, we're going to try to get you to where you're reordering monthly, because that actually means that you're going to be able to reduce or even eliminate a lot of your warehousing footprint, which will reduce your cost. If you're looking at these things on an annual basis, you can do that. If you're a mid-sized brand, think about reordering every quarter. And if you're a low volume brand, you're going to do it about biannually. But in all 3 cases, you're still doing more than 1 PO a year. And so it's still true. You need to do inventory forecasting and then bake on production planning and share all of that data with your factory so you can get the lowest cost and ensure that you're never actually out of stock.
That's great. One part that I love about it, especially when I join in on calls when you're working with brands on this and going through this, is it's really surprising how many brands have no idea what their, per unit storage cost is and
Yeah.
how much they're spending a year,
Yeah.
just on extra storage costs because they're producing an extra 1,000 units because that's their buffer. They don't know how to plan for this stuff.
Yep.
When brands start planning like this and they get really into the nitty-gritty and doing a real true production planning and factoring in those little details and shipping at optimal times, on average, how much are brands saving a year? What are they adding to their bottom line?
We've been able, as you know, Rob, we've been able to save our brands between 30 and 50%. That translates to 6 or 7 figures to your bottom line. When you're in e-commerce, this is a margin business. Every penny, every dollar really, really counts towards the bottom line. So those are big gains.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could give it an assignment to everybody that's listening to this call right now, is when you're done with this, start thinking about that per unit storage cost that you have and that excess inventory that you have sitting around of those SKUs that maybe you knew it takes a longer to sell, but we're just going to buy them because we're running a production of all these products right now, and start to think about the savings that you actually would generate if we were on this production planning just based on the demand we have and doing it where, okay, now we're really ordering what we need and not just panic ordering.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the panic order, the running out of inventory, the last minute. I mean, Rob, I feel like we've seen it all. We've just seen brands really get scared and pulled back because inventory acquisition is the largest cost for an emerging brand. We get it. You guys don't want to pull the trigger on those big POs. So the idea is production planning allows you to actually pull trigger on smaller POs, reduce the risk, and lower your COGS. it's a win for everyone. The factory's winning
Yeah.
because they have line of sight on more production runs. You're winning because you don't have to drain your bank with huge amounts of cash flow. And you're reducing your cost and you're reducing your stress and your headaches, and your product's just going to get better and better and better.
I think another thing that, brands start to realize when they start to actually get into these more frequent orders and breaking them down to the quantities that they need, like you said, obviously you're saving on your COGS because you have a true line of sight of every detail from labor costs and material that you're going to need. But now that you're in a more frequent schedule and the factory sees the line of sight on it and you're going to be constantly running these productions, that results in better payment terms. So
Yeah.
that means that you're saving even more money out of pocket than normally when you're doing these big, large bulk productions, maybe only on a quarterly basis. And that's something brands are always looking for. That's usually the first question that we get when a new brand comes to us is, hey, I need new payment terms. I need net terms. I need this or that. And it's like, it's possible, absolutely. You
Yeah.
can't get to that until you get in a production plan, and you'll then quickly realize, well, okay, this is how I get these net terms because there is a line. It's like everybody sees it here. So for the brands that aren't doing it, and you're always asking for payment terms, how do I get the payment terms? This is where you start.
Yep, yep. Okay, Rob, we are right at time. This was so fun. And I just want to say thank you to everyone that joined. We're going to be sending out a recap of this as well as a spreadsheet that you can download that will do your production planning for you. And we're going to send a link to my calendar, actually. Book time with me if you want any help, or if you want me to do your production planning for you. Happy to. So thanks, guys, and we'll see you next month. Rob, I think next month we're going to talk about my favorite topic, which is how to come up with a new idea and launch a product line extension for your brand.
Perfect. All right.
Yay.
Well,
All right.
looking
See you guys
forward to
soon.
it. Thanks
Bye.
for joining, everyone. Bye.